Good morning, everyone, and welcome.
Good morning. We're so happy to see you this morning. Welcome to the Utah Shakespeare Festival. Welcome to Cedar City. How many of you have been to the festival before? We have a group who knows this. A few newcomers. Anyone first timer for the festival? Well, welcome. We hope you're enjoying your experience so far. My name is Kate Moncrief. I am a professor at Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland, and I'm joined by my colleague every morning, Kate McPherson, who is a professor and a director of the honors program just north of here at UVU, Utah Valley University. Kate and I have been colleagues for 20 years. We've written a number of books together. And so this is the Kate and Kate show. If you just ask a question to Kate, one of us will get to you. We are really happy to see you. We are also joined by a special guest. We'll have another guest coming our way, but we have Isabella Smith Bernstein, who is the dramaturg for the show we saw last night, Shakespeare in Love, the show we'll be discussing this morning. We're also going to be joined in about 15 minutes by Brian Vaughn, who is the artistic director of the festival and who directed last night's show. He is watching one of his children in a performance this morning. So he needs a time turner like Hermione and Harry Potter to be in more than one place, but he'll be joining us in just a few minutes. So we thought we'd kick off this morning by giving you a little bit of the background on the play, a little bit of context. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kate.
All right. Well, thanks. I have, since this is my first seminar on Shakespeare in Love, I actually have some notes. So I will be looking at my notes periodically. But let me tell you a little bit about the play. Let me quickly ask you, how many of you have seen the film on which the play is based? So a few of you, half a dozen or so of you. The film came out in 1998, which shockingly to those of us that are older now is quite a while ago, almost 20 years ago, of course. It seems like I thought the film was like, oh, that's pretty new film. No, it's not. It's almost as old as my child who is graduating from college next year. So the film came out in 1998. And it was hugely acclaimed critically as a film. It won 7 Academy Awards that year. It sort of swept the Oscars that year. Best director, best screenplay, right? All kinds of accolades for the film. And so a number of years after that, the original screenwriter, it was written by Tom Stoppard and Mark Norman, the original screenplay. And I'll tell you a little bit about Tom Stoppard in just a minute. But then, almost a generation later, production company decided they wanted to adapt it for the stage. And so Stoppard came back to it along with another playwright named Lee Hall. And so they developed the script that we saw last night, which is, if you remember the film, the play is a great deal like it, but different in very significant and important ways. And I'm sure we'll get to talk with Brian about how he worked with that script and his memory of the film and what he wanted to do with that. So
You might know some of Lee Hall's work. He is the writer of the Pittman Painters and also Warhorse.
yeah. So he's an acclaimed playwright. So I don't know if you know much about Tom Stoppard. His most famous Shakespeare connection probably is one of his breakout plays was Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. He's that guy. But he was born in Czechoslovakia and moved to the UK as a young person with his mother, who'd been widowed, and his new father. And he went to school there. He moved into journalism. He wrote for theater magazines in London. And then he went on to start writing plays for BBC Radio. And then he started winning. His plays were critically acclaimed. They transferred to New York. He's won Tony Awards and all sorts of things like that. He's also worked extensively as a screenwriter and worked on films like Empire of the Sun and and the recent Anna Karenina. And I think perhaps most entertainingly, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Not something you'd necessarily expect from a writer who's quite literary in so many ways. And as Kate mentioned, Lee Hall, the other playwright of Shakespeare in Love, has written many plays and won many awards, Tony Awards, Olivier Awards, Drama Desk Awards. So he is quite a famous and working playwright. The play first opened in London in 2014. And the North American premiere was at the Stratford Festival of Canada.
Did you see the London production?
Has anybody seen the show on stage? No. Okay.
So you were really had a treat last
And I never had seen it on stage either. Kate saw it in London. And that's really exciting. Did you ever see it on stage as well? Okay, yeah. So it premiered in North America at the Stratford Festival of Canada last year to as part of the quarter centenary of Shakespeare's death. Um, and we are very excited here at the Utah Shakespeare Festival to be one of the sites of the American premieres,
Yeah,
and
this
the
is the
others.
regional, the West Coast regional or the
Yeah,
West regional premiere, and there are
right.
only 3 theaters running it right now. It's going to be everywhere soon, but
Yeah.
you're getting in early.
You're getting in early. It's showing this summer, I believe, in Chicago and in Sarasota, Florida. Is that right?
Over the other side of
Okay.
Chicago. Yeah.
In Oregon. Oh, at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Okay. Um, so the play that you saw last night reprises, of course, much of the film with important changes to account for it being on stage rather than on screen. And perhaps the biggest change is that Christopher Marlowe has a much bigger role in the play than in the film. He's an important element in the film, but he's on stage quite a bit and gets to talk more in the stage play that we saw last night. Isabel has some super great lists of stuff, right? This play is Brian Vaughan calls it in the souvenir program of a Valentine to Shakespeare. And it's in fact, even maybe more than a Valentine to Shakespeare, a Valentine to literary nerds and theater nerds like us. And so the whole play is filled with a zillion references and little Easter eggs for people who know. And like there's a ton of name dropping and stuff. The other important, and I'll get Isabel to help us with some of the name dropping stuff and plays and stuff that it references in a second. The really important thing, though, I think for audiences to keep in mind when they're thinking about this play is that this is a piece of historical fiction, maybe emphasis on the fiction. So it's rooted in history and in when and how and with whom and where Shakespeare wrote many of his plays, but it takes enormous liberties with the specifics that theater historians have now confirmed. Dates, people, places, sequences, who plays which roles in a play, which theater a play was first premiered at, all kinds of liberties are taken in it. Um, but it's still super fun to watch, even if you have all the historical background in your head. I so enjoy this as a play. In my first semester at Utah Valley University in Orem, I was given a Shakespeare class to teach, a lower division Shakespeare class, intro to Shakespeare class, and I centered the entire class around Shakespeare in Love. And so I drew my whole syllabus from Shakespeare plays that are heavily referenced in the screenplay. We read the screenplay itself. We watched the film. And so I have a great love for the original piece. And I so enjoyed myself watching the show last night. And so I'm really excited to get to talk with you about it today. Maybe just a little bit more background, and then we'll move into questions. And then when Brian shows up, we'll do some Q&A with him about his ideas. So you want to tell us some more stuff?
Well, why don't we turn to Isabel and ask her a little bit about? I think your husband had an interesting observation this morning to say this is Shakespeare fan fiction in some ways, which is a nice way to think about it. So, as the dramaturg coming to the play with both the historical roots and then the fictional part, maybe you have a few little tidbits you'd share about the way that you and the actors and the director thought about that.
Sure. So I work with Brian from the very beginning on this production. And so we worked very closely to kind of create the narrative that we want in the play. And a big part of that was talking about how historically accurate it should be. Because as Kate said, it's historical fiction, and that's absolutely true. Like a lot of the characters are the wrong age or they're friends with the wrong people. So Brian and I talked, and I met with each of the actors individually, and 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 we kind of talked about the character historically, which was useful, but a lot of it didn't ultimately, like, it informs a character without being literally put on stage. So for instance, I talked about how Ned Allen and Henslow were actually very close friends, and Ned Allen actually married Henslow's stepdaughter. And Ned Allen and Henslow were in business together and kept trying to open a bear baiting pit. Um, it never worked out because they got the bear, but not the space.
What do you do with the bear?
Exactly. So
You hang on to it until the winter's tale.
Yeah, right.
precisely. there are little tidbits like that that kind of inform like the entrepreneurship of Henslow that aren't in the play but are in the actor's brain. So that was a really big part of what Brian and I kind of worked to have the play historically informed but not historically accurate. And kind of in line there, I talked with the actress who played Queen Elizabeth, Susanna, and we talked about her reign, and historical accuracy for her ended up being more helpful because she's playing such an iconic historical figure, whereas how many people think about Burbage on a day-to-day basis or in a history class.
Only people like me. Yeah, keep going. Absolutely.
Okay. So also we talked a lot about London at the time and the importance of theater in itself, because theater it was one of the best and only means of entertainment, because there are no movies, there are no concerts, everybody can go and enjoy it together. And part of this was that was important to our play was the deep sense of community that's part of theater, and everybody here at USF certainly feels it, and it was true back then, and it's true now. It's a group of people who come together with an artistic mission, who will do anything for each other and work together for a common goal. And so that sense of historical camaraderie and our modern day um, atmosphere in the theater, it also really informed it, because we were really interested in showing a community of people who are all different and maybe down on their luck, or a woman, um, can all come together and enjoy kind of the same thing.
So, a little fun fact here, early modern London at this time had a population of about 200,000. On any given day, 10,000 people were attending the theater. So, in terms of this being a cultural center, the way that we might talk about the hottest Netflix show that's streaming, and that we're going to have a common vocabulary to talk about that show together, that was early modern theater in London, wildly popular, a cultural vocabulary that people shared. And so the time period that this play is set in, the 1590s, we have theater is burgeoning, theater is developing. We get some nice details about the actual theaters these were in, the Rose and the Curtain. So the setting of this play is before Shakespeare's Globe opens, 1599. So the theater's names that you may or may not have heard of, things like the Rose and the Curtain. The Rose opened in 1587, and it was the first purpose-built theater on the South Bank. The Globe would be a rival very soon after that. It was only the fourth purpose-built theater. The others were in the city of London. And so this play is deeply embedded in that culture, as Isabel is saying. The theater is growing, there's a community, it's collaborative, and it's a big part of what London was at that time.
Fun web reference for you. If you're interested in theater history at all, there's a really great website developed by a colleague of mine at the University of Victoria in Canada. It's called The Map of Early Modern London. And you can go to this website and you can choose from these menus, looking at a map about where things were from a contemporary engraving of the city of London. And then you can click on them and you can see what things are around other things and where the theaters are in proximity to one another. And so the Curtain Theater was on the sort of northern suburbs near the city wall, outside the official city of London. And this is the theater that we're talking about here. So you can read entries on that Map of Early Modern London website about these theaters that are really, really interesting. There's also another really great website called Shakespeare's London Theaters, Shout. That's a really great website developed by some scholars in the UK. So in case you want to dig a little deeper about this Rose and this Curtain stuff, there's a couple of fun web references for you. Welcome, everybody. Come and sit down. And please, as the sun moves, do not feel self-conscious about wanting to get up and go sit in a shady spot. You will not be bothering anyone by doing that. It's important to stay out of this beating down summer sun here in southern Utah. So let's see. Any other
I think
bits?
before that's probably enough tidbits. Before Brian joins us, and we'll be on the lookout for him running over from the Randall. Let's go ahead and turn it to some of your questions. My big question is those little. Did you have some favorite references, either Shakespeare plays you recognized or other kinds of tidbits that made you laugh or you had questions about, or other general questions or observations? Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Here,
I read in the
since we're taping, I'm going to ask you to
Okay,
use a mic if you
microphone is
wouldn't
on.
mind. Thank you.
I had read the write up in Midsummer, and they called those references Easter eggs. And looking for them, and you find new ones every time you watch.
Yeah, it's loads of fun. And
Does that reference come from video games?
I think
Easter
it
eggs?
does. Yes, I
does.
believe so. That
Yeah,
is
that
a,
there
that's a
are,
gaming culture reference.
Yeah,
Here comes Brian.
For people who are all embedded, and you get those little special treats, right, that you recognize and go, yeah. Hi,
Come
Brian.
join us.
Good
We
morning.
have here the august presence of Mr. Brian Vaughn, artistic director of the Utah Shakespeare Festival and director of Shakespeare in Love. And so since he's here, keep thinking of questions, and we'll turn to those in just a minute after we give Brian a chance to talk with us. Right. Microphone for you, sir. We are
Brian,
live streaming. We're live streaming this.
You are jumping right in. So I'm going to give you a softball to start with. I'm going to ask you that director question. As you were looking at the play, and this is regional premiere, it's a pretty new play in the U.S. Could you just talk a little bit about your vision for this particular production? The other question I'd like to follow up with on vision is this space was done indoors on the West End. So maybe you could talk about this particular space and your vision.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I'm sorry I'm late. My daughter was performing in our Playmakers program, which is a young actors program, and so she was doing her scene, and I, of course, could not miss that. So I apologize. My daughter trumps Shakespeare in Love today. She was playing Phoebe in As You Like It, so I had to check her out. So I apologize for being late. Yeah, that was first off, seeing the production. I did see the production on the West End. We took a theater group here at the festival. We have every year they do an annual development tour, and we tour with a bunch of our patrons who will go on a 2-week excursion somewhere exotic. And it was a couple years ago. We went to Scotland and London, and we saw Shakespeare in Love on the West End, and immediately was drawn to it. Actually, a precursor to that, when we did a production of Peter and the Starcatcher here a number of years ago, which I directed, that production is produced by Disney Theatrical. And while they were out here, we were having a lot of discussion about future projects and all of that. And Tom Schumacher, who is the head of Disney Theatrical, and his team were here, and they saw our Adams Theater. This was prior to the Ingolstadt being built, while they were seeing Shakespeare in Love, while they were seeing Peter and the Starcatcher. And they said, "Oh my gosh, we're working on this project, this adaptation of the film of Shakespeare in Love. You guys should, check it out." And we were like, "Oh my gosh, first off, I was a huge fan of the film when the film came out in the 90s. I'll never forget seeing it for the first time. Completely sort of changed my perspective about Shakespeare and who he might have been." So then flash forward, the production was being done on the West End by Disney Theatrical and the producers in London. And immediately saw it there, was completely enamored with the piece, and knew that we had to do it here at the festival. So we, petitioned basically to have the production. Well, when we were producing it, when we knew got the rights, we established the rights from them, and we knew we were going to be one of a couple of theaters that might have the rights to do it at any one time. They've been trying to license the show for a New York production, and that was a little bit tricky for them. So it performed on the West End, and then it moved to Stratford in Ontario. At the Stratford Festival. And then they opened the rights to 3 Shakespeare companies in the country. And those 3 countries were Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which is the oldest Shakespeare festival in our country, Chicago Shakespeare Theater in Chicago, and then the Utah Shakespeare Festival. Well, when we decided to produce it, we were saying, where are we going to do this? Because seeing it on the West End, there's so many moments in the play where it bounces in between the indoors or the sort of backstage and onstage moments in the play, as well as jumping to various sections of the court and Greenwich and so forth. So that was the big question, was where are we going to do it? Well, we started talking with them, and we said, we are one of the only theaters in the country where we have a theater that is really what this play is about doing plays outside at the Curtain or the Rose or the Globe. And so we said, we have to do it outside. We have to solve the sort of tricky elements of the script to make it work in that Elizabethan setting, with the tiring house, a slip stage and casement doors and all of that. So that became sort of how am I going to direct this play outside and sort of not fix, but sort of jump over the hurdles that might exist in the script that you can establish with lighting and blackouts and all that stuff, which you can get in an indoor theater that you can't get out here. The transitions have to be seamless. And then it really just became about, this play is really about that. It is about the theater. It is about the alchemy of people coming together to create art, and that we should see the seams. We should see the things that are the rough edges and the sort of thing that makes this drama happen, which are the people in the play. And that was the really thing that I was really enamored with, that it's both a Valentine to the form of making theater, as well as what it's saying about the central character in the play, which is Viola de Lesseps, and sort of her being driven by her heart to do something that she wants to do. She starts to defy social conformity to sort of make change. And how that is an inspiration for William Shakespeare then to pen this amazingly strong female characters from henceforth in a lot of his plays. So that was, um, that was sort of where I jumped off from. But there were a lot of tricky things. How are we going to solve this? How are we going to do the bedroom? Are we, do we have an actual bed? Do we, and then we just started with the designers, Scott Davis, and who's our set designer, and Bill Black, who I've known for a long time. Never worked with him as a director, but I've been an actor wearing his clothes for many seasons, and he just has an impeccable eye and especially great attention to detail for the period. We just started talking, and Donna Rizika's lighting, and Isabel with dramaturgy, and Melissa, my assistant director, and then of course the cast. And one of the really special things about the show, and one of the things we knew also was unique about it, was how can we produce this in a way and sort of make an event out of it. And then we said, well, why don't we put it alongside Romeo and Juliet, so that our audience can actually see an origin story about, well, maybe what was the inspiration for Juliet and Romeo and all of this. And then our audience, they can come the next night and they can actually see Romeo and Juliet, which they can see the play in its full form. That to me was a great conversation, and is actually unlike what a lot of other companies are doing. No other theater is doing it alongside Romeo and Juliet. There are now productions that are going to be happening in the next year where they're pairing it with Twelfth Night. I know a theater, they were talking about doing it with Two Gentlemen of Verona. But we're the only theater right now that's doing it outside in a venue that is synonymous with what these plays are about, as well as sharing some of that same company that is folding into Romeo and Juliet. So I'm really thrilled about it. It's been a great adventure under doing it, but it's been a real thrill. It's also a tricky script because it's a screenplay, adapted from a screenplay. So how you sort of take that and put it into a theatrical form was another big conversation. I think that Lee Hall, who did the adaptation of the film, Lee Hall also adapted Billy Elliot, that film, and made the musical version of that, has, I think, solved a lot of stuff. And I think the play works in great I think it has great success on the outdoor stage, actually. I had a moment last night where I was like, I really think this works out here, especially for the period and the design and the idea of sitting under the stars. It's about that very idea. It's about people celebrating what is so beautiful about Shakespearean theater, and the sort of coming out to the audience and the sort of shared experience of what these plays are. And it also helps the audience use their imagination to kind of go into these different locations. It keeps them thinking, which I like quite a bit.
Well, having seen both the West End production and this one, I have to say, first, congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
Loved it. But I really loved the outdoor setting. I wondered how that was going to work and how we were going to deal with when you needed not to be in a theater. How was that going to work? So I'm a big nerd for transitions, which I thought were beautiful. But I found their last moment to be so cinematic, but also so theatrical. How do you solve that problem of the ocean and the final moment with Viola? I absolutely loved it outdoors. You guys in agreement? Works outdoors, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
I was as somebody, as I mentioned to you, I'm really familiar with the screenplay. I taught like a ton of Shakespeare courses centered, jumping off that screenplay and like starting in like 2000 when it was really new. And then I had to leave it behind because I was really like, oh, that's like an old movie now. And so I know
It's
it really
amazing how many people actually haven't seen the movie.
Yeah,
That's been a
we
comment.
surveyed the audience. About half a dozen people here had seen the film, but I was very moved by the emotional content of the play. And I'll be honest with you, I cried just a little at the end when they said goodbye. I really did. Like, even though I know what's going to happen, for me, that's like watching King Lear. I cannot watch the end of King Lear, even if I have a book and I'm taking notes, without weeping when it happens. And I cried last night when they had to say goodbye. And so I really, really love the emotional content of it. I wondered if you could talk just a little bit about, that sort of line between character and history that your actors had to walk, and maybe Isabel can help you with that.
Yeah, that was a big discussion point for us early on, especially because obviously we're playing real people here, a lot of them, Burbage and Ned Allen and Shakespeare.
Just that
Just
guy.
Shakespeare.
Just that guy.
And then so we did a lot of research. Isabel provided an amazing amount of dramaturgy on both the time period, the playing form, and then it really just became about the actor discussion and how we, wanted to undertake this. The great thing is, we don't really know the truth about a lot of things. I mean, we do have an idea about some of the historical things, but a lot of it is conjecture, and there's some indication of who Shakespeare was and all of that. But so it also is kind of a blank slate in many ways that you can kind of play him however you want to play him. And then it just is like you have to do what's in the script and just let the script inform you as the individual and the actor and all of that. But the period was important to all of us, and I mean, Isabel was so great about that, about saying, the actors of this time, this was their lifeblood. This was a big deal for them, and the idea of Tilney and Her Majesty, her recommendation or accommodation for the players to proceed to go forth was a huge thing. They were always sort of under a government eye, and so that they couldn't mess it up. So there is a danger factor also in there about the form. And that was another thing that I just really love about the play. I love that Viola sparks people to bold and be daring to go against sort of the social conformity that is put on these people. And I think it's without accident that Queen Elizabeth is such a presence in this play as another female leader in this world, and her voice on that, and her opinion about Viola in this, her sort of all-knowing quality about her also, that she sort of knows everything that's going on without voicing that, and then raising it as a bet in there that can a playwright show true love. I've not seen it before, and she sort of puts that wager out there, and I just love that. And I love, one of my favorite lines is where she says, "I do know what it's like to be in a man's position. By God, I do," which is great. And that moment where Viola is pretending to be a male actor playing, Juliet, and her saying, what at the
Yeah, she says it's your mistake is understandable, Mr. Tilney.
yeah,
The resemblance.
the resemblance is
remarkable.
is remarkable. Yeah.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I love that because she herself was doing that same thing of breaking down walls and getting engaged to leaders all over the world and keeping them at bay. And there's an entire age named after her that is significant to the power of this woman and her opinion about the female presence in this time.
Right.
All that stuff was great and such a foundation for everybody in the play, I think.
There's a line that Viola, and you put it as one of your program notes in the souvenir program. If you haven't picked that up, take a look at it. that Viola says she wants love that overthrows life, unbiddable, ungovernable, like a riot in the heart. You might remember that line from last night. And I thought, what a resonance that is with Elizabeth, that idea, because women were supposed to be biddable. And there was lots of books about governing women in this time period, tons and tons and tons of books instructing men and families how to govern their women. And that's a really significant line in the play. I'm really glad you chose that, because it shows that ripple effect of what it is when a woman makes waves.
Well, and Elizabeth herself, she was very attentive to what her role is and also thinking about gender. She gave a very famous speech at Tilbury before the encounter with the Spanish Armada. And one of the quotes from that, she says, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too." Right? So she's really walking that particular gender line. And so I love what Brian is saying about danger. This experimentation with gender, the danger in the theatrical form, this theatrical form is developing. It is so new. Prior to Elizabeth, playing companies had to be attached to households. It's still growing out of the religious dramas of the previous era. It's only when Elizabeth licenses companies. Players were vagabonds, rogues, and sturdy beggars, and they could be arrested, right? They're a bunch of ragtag people, and this is the first time it's starting to be professional. It's starting to come together, and the playwright chooses that particular historical moment as these theater companies are developing. It's exciting, it's dangerous, it's desire, it's passion, it's gender. Like, this is such a exciting time period that it's set in, but I love your word, danger.
Yeah. Well, so should we turn to some questions from the audience now? Ready? Sure. Okay, who is ready and who has a question for any of us or for Brian? Don't be shy. You're being shy.
Speechless. The dog.
Okay, back here.
Always comes back to the dog. The dog's named after a Shakespeare character. His name's Titus.
Actually,
that's his real name.
I had 2 questions. Can you remind us who John Webster is? And where did you get the dog?
I can help with that. John Webster is a Jacobean playwright who writes The Duchess of Malfi and The White Snake. He writes these horrible, The White Devil.
That's a band from the 80s.
He writes these kind of like horribly bloody, terrible plays. Like, there's a woman who's killed with a poisoned Bible in one of his plays.
They're wonderful.
They're really very imaginative about how people are killed, as you can kind of see from the play. And the dog is the actor who played Wessex, Jeff Kent. That's his dog. His name is Titus Veronicus. He's a joy to work with. I had the privilege of holding him in a lot of rehearsals when he wasn't needed on stage. And he's a very sweet dog.
He's an equity dog. He has particular hours that he's allowed to work and gets scheduled breaks, etc. Yes.
Yeah, he has quite a long resume too. I mean, he's been out there. He's stage worthy. He's a great dog, and he's got an amazing face. And it really became about how are we going to incorporate. The one scene in the play. It's just a very tricky thing because the dog has to create chaos but you also don't want to have a chaotic dog on stage, so trying to sort of craft that stuff was tricky. It was actually more about the response, I think, from the court than actually what the dog is doing. But we tried, at first he was in only like one scene, and then we were like, we got to bring him back. He's so cute, and he, is so docile. And so we created that little bag that Henslow's carrying him in, just to have his little face perking out all the time. So he's a good dog. He's a star. This guy's on Facebook page. You can check it all out.
The West End dog
Instagram.
was big, and I loved the change to a little dog you could carry around and being in the satchel. That was pretty.
Yeah, cool. I mean, there's things in the script where the dog. I mean, there's one when they get into the R&J, the dog comes in. It's supposed to knock Wessex over and like knock him down, and I just thought it was funnier to have a really small dog. It's just kind of funny
I like
that this little dog the queen loves.
And we all love a dog, right? We were looking for that dog.
Well, and that's the big joke in the play about two gents. It's like people think about Two Gentlemen of Verona, and they always talk about Crab. And Two Gentlemen of Verona, while it does have some very, themes in it that are they resonate great about friendship and all of that. It's not his greatest play. It's just not. It's tricky and a little clunky in places. And but the dog is always at the forefront of that. So the jokes about Two Gentlemen of Verona in this, I think, are really great. I think they're actually really well woven in because it does show us a playwright who's taking that form and trying to make it something better than just a comedy, make it richer than just a comedy. And that, of course, is what we see in Romeo and Juliet. The first half of that play is very lighthearted. It's very fun. And then you see what happens when, things start to happen and it gets real and more dire and more dangerous. And that's exactly what happens in Shakespeare in Love, that mirror.
Now, Kate, remind me, in the screenplay, the dog is actually named Crab, but I think the change to here is it's Spot. So you got this good joke about out damn Spot, right?
Yeah, yeah. That the dog's name is Spot playing Crab. Yeah, I think it's
right, right. Okay, who has some other questions or ideas they want to air out, responses, curiosities? Okay.
I think pairing it with Romeo and Juliet was so obvious. I'm surprised that no one else is doing that. And I have an idea for the future. Kiss Me, Kate, and Taming of the Shrew.
It's so funny because that actually we almost did that one year. Kiss Me, Kate, and Shrew, and it's still sort of been in our idea, our mindset, and we decided not to do it because we thought it might be too much Shrew in the season. And but yeah, it is interesting that we are the only company that's doing it together. I mean, right now, I think that might become more common. I know the Stratford Festival, they're doing Romeo and Juliet. They did Shakespeare in Love last season, and they're doing Romeo and Juliet this year, as well as Twelfth Night. So I think they have both of them, and I think it's Twelfth Night that they're doing. It's either Twelfth Night or Adu. I think it's Twelfth Night. They're doing them this season, the second season, to sort of see that for their audience. But yeah, I think it's really wonderful that our audience are going to be able to see both of them in the same pass.
Well, it's worth noting that the actress who played Viola is going to be Juliet, right?
Yeah, I mean that was I serve also as casting director, and David, who assisted me with this season, obviously, that was the huge thing, where it's like trying to have some of those actors cross over into the other play as much as possible. And Jim will probably speak to this a little bit tomorrow too, after Romeo and Juliet. The thing that I think is also interesting about it, Shakespeare was in his 30s here, or 30 when he was writing Romeo and Juliet, and Romeo and Juliet, obviously, they're teens, they're teenagers. So finding that, the needs for each player are a little bit different. So we would try to thread that in a way that it was kind of interesting also. So having Betsy play both of them, I think, is great because you get to see her really play Juliet tonight in a really beautiful performance, by the way. As well as Viola, who has a little bit more spark and a little bit more daring boldness to her, and is a little bit older, and also get to see her play Juliet and what happens in that play, as well as the idea that maybe Shakespeare's not playing Romeo because he only gets thrown into Romeo in Shakespeare in Love, that just by accident, but that you see the actor who's playing Marlowe goes in to play Romeo. And in this play, you see Shakespeare play Tybalt, who is, sort of the antagonist. I thought was interesting that the two compatriots in Shakespeare in Love are then the two that become, protagonist, antagonists in the other play. I thought we thought was really interesting. And so some of the parallels, all this stuff was just about how can our audience see these plays differently? And maybe there's a little bit of a connection here and all of that. But the reality is Romeo and Juliet takes place in Italy, in Verona, and is an Italian version of what the Elizabethans might have done. And Shakespeare in Love is very much an Elizabethan play. It takes place in London and all of that.
Okay,
we have a comment on one other thing about the plays going together. I think it's kind of brilliant that you've put Romeo and Juliet and Midsummer Night's Dream together. They're both written in 1595, and they're both using that same root story from Ovid. About Pyramus and Thisbe. So there's really conversation among all three of these plays to be had. They're speaking to each other. So the Romeo and Juliet story is the play within a play at the end of Midsummer Night's Dream. So
yeah, exactly.
And it's interesting. You mentioned the Romeo and Juliet, which we'll see tonight, of course, is a play that things are very happy in the first part, and then there's a bad transition and things go south. Midsummer Night's Dream is just the opposite if you pay attention, right? Things are terrible at the beginning of the play. Things are falling apart. People have been conquered, women are under threat of death, couples are torn asunder, and then it turns happy.
Then they go out to
As
the
is
forest.
As You Like It, very same thing
Yeah.
with As You Like It.
So it's a trope. We have a gentleman here with a question.
Last night was a premiere, and in the guidebook and everything else, it talks about, things may change, you may stop at any time and things like that. Was there anything in the play that you saw that you think needs to come out or needs to be changed around?
Yeah, there were a couple moments. Obviously, this is a comedy also, so hearing where the laughs fall and some of those lines, actors are constantly learning things. Maybe I don't need to emphasize this as much as this. This is getting a bigger reward than this, truncating things to sort of get the more bang for your buck and all of that. But there were a couple of things last night that I was like, maybe I need to alter a couple little, like the ending, for instance. Like the audience was on top of the ending because it's present, sort of woven through the play, and to sort of see that final character take that on. When that final gesture is, by doing that, we lost, the audience reacted at the line and sort of went into the curtain call. And there is a final gesture that I have with Viola at the end of the play. And that maybe that needs to happen in the breath between, like little things. It was a discussion point after the show, which I'm actually going to incorporate in the next preview, because I want to see how it plays different in front of the next audience. And then we can make a decision on opening. Should we go this way or should we go that way? That is what previews are for. Previews are kind of a trial run. When you're working on a new play, often previews, you'll get a whole new set of pages after the next preview because things didn't work, or things might have been confusing, or that the punctuation might not be helping you here. Maybe the laugh falls here. All that stuff is happening constantly in previews, which is why we have them. And even for a classical play, As You Like It and Midsummer Night's Dream, those that are tried and true, depending on each particular production, there are things that you might want to tweak as you go through, that you learn things from have an audience. You learn the flow of the play, you learn the arc of the play, you learn where an audience might sit back, where they might tune out, or where they're really engaged. All that stuff is informative for the director. So there are little things last night that I noticed. We also had one of our actors has the stomach flu, actually, and he actually ducked out of the last 12 minutes of the show at one moment because he was just weak. He had stomach flu the day before. He was out of our Guys and Dolls dress rehearsal the night previous, and is on tonight in Romeo and Juliet. And so, we were like, go home, go rest. He had a yeoman's effort, a badge of courage here on this. That he was even here last night. John Daly, who plays Fennyman, he has a stomach flu. And then another actor this morning or afternoon, he had a stomach flu yesterday in the afternoon. So we had two actors yesterday afternoon who weren't with us. They were both here last night, and one of them was worse than the other. So these things happen, especially in a company of 60 actors who are pretty close together and spending a lot of time together. And this rehearsal process is tricky. It's 7 weeks of rehearsal for these plays, which seems like a lot of time. But when you're working on 3 plays at any given time, you're really only looking at 16 hours a week of principal time, 4 4-hour blocks a week where you're working on these plays. So there's a lot of gestation time, and there's a lot of time between. Overall, the hours are like 120 hours, something like that, which is really like 3 weeks of concentrated time on that. And when you're working on 5-act plays or big musicals or big farces where there's a lot of business, a lot of action happening around that, it's a tricky endeavor. And the actors love it because they get to bounce in between a lot of different styles. And the repertory model, which really makes us unique, that you get to see something different every single day, twice a day, is really what makes us unique, and is a form that is sort of falling away, that rep model. There are very few theaters that exist in a true rep model. and it's amazing, but it is really tricky and it is really challenging, and your endurance is everything. Another thing is, when people arrive here the first season or the first week of rehearsal, you have to sort of warn them, look, you're at 10,000 feet elevation. There's no humidity. You're going to dry out in places you didn't expect to dry out. And you're going to be tired. You're going to be tired because it's a completely different thing when you come from California and you're at sea level. And the amazing thing is they're here all summer long and they build up this great endurance, and then they go back and they're like, I can sing two notes higher than when I got here, or I can run for an hour longer.
I love to go running
cool.
I love to go running at sea level. Like Cedar City is, I mean, there's 10,000 feet in the mountains. It's about 6,000 here in the city, but it's high desert. And I love going to London because I'm like, I can run forever. This is
See,
awesome.
I'm on the opposite side. I suffer. I live on the East Coast in Chestertown, where our elevation is 11. So the first few days are pretty awful. I get out here, and I'm also a certified yoga instructor. And by the end of the summer, I go home and I feel like Superwoman.
Yeah, it's great. Okay,
the lack of humidity is the big thing,
challenge.
because the moisture, and you're speaking outside, and
Right.
you have to really stay hydrated.
Dry, so dry. We had a question about the music.
Yes, we totally enjoyed the play. It was just wonderful and creative. I was curious about if the music was written for this play, or if it was an old form that was used. It had so much dissonance in it. That
Yeah,
it
that's
seemed
a great
like
question, actually.
variation of an older form.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. It was one of the tricky things about doing the production, because the licensing for the show, actually, initially, and the original production had strolling musicians through the play, and those musicians sang all of the choral moments in the show live, and they were male singers. When you license the show, it comes as a package with the music. Now, there was a little bit of that has changed since the initial licensing of the show. Now they provide you the orchestration and all this kind of stuff, but there's also a package where you can get the soundscape from the Stratford production. They recorded the instrumentation from that Stratford production without the vocals and all of that, and you can rent that as a package. When we were budgeting the show, that became a huge question, was how we're going to tackle the music. And I was really taken by the music when I saw it on the West End. I thought it was really beautiful and of the time, an Elizabethan soundscape, which is using sackbut and crumb horns and drums and all of this stuff that is evocative of the Elizabethan age, I wanted in this play. Then it became about, okay, our budget didn't allow us to have live musicians. Point blank. That was just what it was.
On period instruments.
And on period instruments. It's tricky to find those type of players, period. So it became about, okay, how are we going to put this soundscape into the show? And then we just started working on it, and basically became down to the idea about having both here a little bit. There's also a lot of choral moments in the show, and I knew that I wanted some of that to be live, because I think it's better live. So the idea of incorporating maybe 4 of the actors that sort of are this quartet of singers who are also kind of storytellers and a bit of a framing device to sort of let the music be affecting what's happening within the action, a representation of what is happening within the scenes. To me, is why we have music. It's another sort of thing that takes us into the emotional core of what's happening in the text. So then we just started working on how we can put these together and blend it. And we're also outside. Those 4 actors are mic'd. None of the other actors are mic'd. Almost all of the other productions that I've seen, I know in Chicago they did this, all the actors are mic'd too, because there's so much there's so much. It is sort of created as a musical in many ways, this piece. And many people question if it's a musical, but it's not. It's a play with music. And now you have the choice if you want to do your own sort of soundscape, or you want to use what they had in the original. That's how they're packaging. And that's kind of one of the licensing things that they're looking at, because it's a new play. If they're going to license it out to other theaters, how are they going to want to do it? Maybe there's 2 options for them so everybody can get the best for each production. Our choice on this was to sort of take a portion of the licensing as well as incorporate a live soundscape with it as much as we could. So it's been a real blend, but I think it works really well with what's happening in the play, and especially the instrumentation as well as these four singers being kind of like a muse themselves, of a sort of choral muse for what's going on in real time, which is actually what is happening with Shakespeare himself, who is finding his own inspiration and his muse in Viola and all of the people that are around him, and Marlowe and all that.
Now, they sing a song numerous times and repeat it in a variety of musical settings, and that song is a period song. The lyrics to that song are original to the time period and appear in Twelfth Night?
Yes,
Yeah,
O Mistress Mine.
Yeah, O Mistress Mine, where are you roaming? Come and see my true love's coming, right? So that's repeated a number of times. We have a question here.
I was wondering about the choreography for the dancing. Was that also a period Elizabethan?
Yeah, Christine Kellogg was our choreographer, and she's been terrific. She choreographs our green show, and she's been amazing because there's a lot of movement in the show. There's a lot of period movement. And when you start taking on a show like this, all of a sudden you go, oh, you know what? We need to have somebody come in and look at this because we want to make sure that this is accurate. Isabel was really great with that. John Harrell, who is in our production, has worked a lot at American Shakespeare Center in Staunton, Virginia, and he has done a lot of period stuff. And Christine, obviously, who's a choreographer, she knew about a lot of that movement-based stuff, such as bowing to when you bow to the queen, when you take your hat off, all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of dialogue, but there are these dances that are woven into the play, and Christine was really great about putting that together. They also have dialogue under those dances, and so you want it to be period, and you want to make sure the text isn't sacrificed, and you want to make sure that the dance is informing what's happening dramatically within the scene. Christine had her eye on. And then I knew that I wanted to weave in a lot of movement also in the show, because there are these transitions that are tricky in this. How we go from the end of the play, which it takes place at the Curtain Theater, Romeo and Juliet, and then we go right back to Will's chamber writing Twelfth Night. How you go from that big moment to this really isolated, zeroed in, irised down thing. To me, it was really about movement and about obviously the actors sort of letting the audience sort of go there with it, with the movement.
Can you talk a little bit about the light in the play? There's a great deal of movement of light. There's candles and lanterns moving all around, which is very evocative, and what you were hoping for with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of references in the play about candles and nights, candles burnt out and all of this, which is in Romeo and Juliet and in this play also. And I thought that the idea of having that was romantic and also would help us as a gesture of kind of an isolated rehearsal room that might be lit by candles, and then you would quickly go into a bedroom and it would be lit by candles, and then you could reconfigure those candles to be in a new location. All that sort of happened during the rehearsal process, and some of those candles carry through into R&J also scenically, which you'll see. And I knew that I wanted to incorporate more of them. I don't know. I liked the idea of the nighttime element of it. I like the idea of metaphorically what that means of a candle and a lantern, about seeing your way and the darkness. And that is woven in a lot of Shakespeare's plays also. And there is a lot of it in Romeo and Juliet, where they talk about the stars and night's candles.
She doth teach the torches to burn bright.
Right. All of this idea of fire, and it is a romantic fire, which also I think ignites the heart and the passions of those individuals within it, as well as it being a formal representation of, oh, now we're at the court, and now I see that all of these candelabras are here to sort of help establish a more royal setting. Well, then we go to her balcony, and maybe those represent a night sky against the back wall of the Ingolstadt. Little things like that the audience can look at it a little bit differently without it being a literal thing. it becomes metaphorical for them.
We have a question down here.
Oh, yeah. Just while you're talking about the choreography, I thought the choreography of the sword fights was just great, and the scenes of chaos where they're tossing that manuscript around
That was
from one
wonderful.
person to the other. That was just brilliant and
Yeah,
brilliantly done.
it's a lot of fun. Jeff Kent, who plays Wessex, he's our fight director on the show, and he's very skilled at that stuff. He's a great storyteller with stage violence. And, I love it because there are polar opposites of combat in the play. Those that are sort of in the comedy of errors vein, which are a little bit silly and a little bit nutty and a little bit farcical. And then you have a sort of Romeo and Juliet, Wessex will fight that is a little bit life and death. And also theatrical, using theatrical props that all of a sudden they're not a real blade.
Yeah.
That there's a struggle with it, but that there is danger. And the escalation of the violence throughout, I think, is really, really theatrical and wonderful.
Just one other quick question. I'm sure you thought about it and talked about it, but did you think about and then reject the idea of doing instead of As You Like It, doing 12th Night as the romantic, or did you think that was just going to be just too much?
No, we did. That did come up actually, and we had just done 12th Night a couple. We're in the middle of our Complete the Canon cycle, and As You had been yet to sort of check off in that. And we also liked the conversation with As You in Midsummer, which was about two plays about lovers escaping into the woods, and the one in the forest of Arden and one in the woods of Athens. And that conversation between those two plays, two comedies in different theaters, but that are thematically similar in some ways, different, but similar. And then more about R&J in this, because Shakespeare in Love, really, the main impetus of Shakespeare in Love is about R&J. The end result is the 12th Night, which you see in Viola. So I love 12th Night. I think it's a perfect play. It's really well woven and really well constructed. So that conversation did come up, but we decided to go with the R&J, the more immediate recognition.
The playwright gives us plenty of those little Easter eggs that we talked about at the beginning. You probably picked up on things like, I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you. We get a little Malvolio in there. So lots of little 12th Night Easter eggs for us.
There are. In fact, some of that is even in the costumes. Obviously Tilney's wearing yellow stockings in the show, and like Malvolio.
The Puritan.
Yes, there's a lot of similarities there. Henslow kind of has a little bit of an Aggie cheek quality to him. Little Easter eggs. That's exactly what it is woven through the whole play. That Isabel might want to talk about this. One thing we did find as we were working on it was like all the lines from every play or gestures or references that you could find in any one of his plays at any given time.
Isabel, do you have a favorite or a most obscure one? We're almost out of time, but let's get one of your favorite Easter eggs in here.
I think my favorite in reference to this season is the As You Like It reference, which is a wonderful, most wonderful, because it just folds into our season so nicely. Although I will say that there are 14 of Shakespeare's plays that are referenced within this play, a couple Marlowes and a few sonnets.
Just one quick observation is I thought even just those little Easter eggs with the little snippets of conversation that were woven in, presumably because Shakespeare heard somebody else saying them, and he was absorbing those into his head. And I know that as a writer, you pick up stuff all around you and you go weaving into something that you're working on, picking up something that you may have heard from a conversation somewhere else. And that is just so true and so accurate of
Computer analysis actually shows that. So we know that Shakespeare was an actor in Ben Jonson's plays, and we know specifically a couple of the plays that he was in. So people who are very good with that kind of computer analysis have showed things like when Shakespeare was acting in Ben Jonson's particular play, certain words in Shakespeare's own plays that Ben Jonson used will peak in Shakespeare's writing. So that's very much true. That happens. We
Okay,
are just about out of
we have
out of
one
time. We have
last
time for
question.
One more
I
question.
know I didn't get all the Easter eggs there, but when I heard palpable hit, I just about fell on the floor. That was unbelievable.
It's so much fun to watch.
I mean, one of my talking in that same idea about one of my favorite lines in the play, it's actually a little bit hidden too, is that when he says, "They say that you are dead," is what Will says to Marlowe, and he says, "Yes, they say that." Which I love that line, and it's not necessarily an Easter egg in the show, but it is about the mystique of William Shakespeare
And who wrote
and who wrote the plays,
and
as
what
well
happened,
as
and
them,
what happened to Marlowe.
Yeah, and Marlowe, the mystique of Marlowe, and their sort of friendship and how that might be penned into each of these plays, but also about how we view Shakespeare. That I mean, we're a Shakespeare festival. This is our touchstone playwright we're talking about here. He's very much alive in our world. The idea of the plays living. I just love that line. And, Viola says that also. I cannot be the woman who denies the world Will Shakespeare. Which is a selfless gift on her part there. Very much that it is the same thing with Will towards her. But that there's an eternal element of these plays living on, and that the characters themselves sort of recognize that in sort of a meta way, to me, is really, really interestingly woven in, as well as the very obvious Easter eggs of the lines, a palpable hit, something is out of joint, tomorrow, when, tomorrow, and tomorrow. These things that are these recognizable lines. There are also these other elements just about Shakespeare himself, which is the lifeblood of this type of writing at the time period, which I love that's woven in.
I'll share one funny. The playwright does some really nice things with things that are so obscure. You have to be super nerdy, a dramaturg, a researcher. Did anyone catch that they say he's going to be as great as Henry Chettle? Right? They'll remember. Anyone know who Henry Chettle is? Right? Why would you? So this guy wrote something like 35 to 50 plays. He was known as a pamphleteer. He is the guy who published the notoriously bad quarto of Romeo and Juliet. So these little things that are woven in are pretty great.
Yeah, very smart.
It's a super smart play. We're very grateful to Via de Lesseps for giving us William Shakespeare, and it's such a treat. If you can come back and see the show again, you will pick up even more. It is a multi-layered treat. We're really glad to have had you here with us today at the Literary Seminar. After the previews have concluded, there will be 2 seminars every day, one at 10 a.m. and another at 11 a.m. The 10 a.m. show will discuss the Ingolstadt and the Ains plays. The 11 a.m. seminar.
9 and 10.
No, 9 and 10. Pardon me. 9 and 10. And the 10 a.m. seminar will discuss the Randall shows, and then the I just blanked.
Ains.
Oh, the Ains plays. No, Ains is at 9. Ains and Ingolstadt's at 9. And 11 a.m. is Randall. Oh, and there's 2 shows in the Randall every day. That's what it is. Great. So I'm still new at this. Kate and I,
that was exactly how we were in trying to decide what show would be at what time. Yeah, Ingolstadt and Ains at 9, and then the Randall shows are at 10.
Right. Kate and I are new as literary seminar directors here. If you've been in the past, you may have enjoyed one of these occasions with Nancy Mellick, Ace Pilkington. Ace will still be here occasionally this summer. Nancy is in retirement, although she's going to pop down for a week at the beginning of August, I guess, and see the shows and enjoy herself here. But we're really pleased to have been invited to facilitate these discussions with patrons after the plays and to get to live here in Cedar City and be part of this company. So thank you for coming, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.
Let's thank these 2 for joining us.